Well, where is our guest? Our guest is not with us.
What did you do to piss him off?
Man, I don't know. I don't think I did anything. I don't think anything in particular was done. I think there were expectations there that are typically not there. It's like you've been scheduled. Okay, that's it. Like, hey, if I get scheduled or if you get scheduled, like we put it on the list of things. We're not big time. Okay, we're not big time like this guy.
So what you're saying is that we have a failure to communicate.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like I am Cool Hand Luke, or maybe I'm the what is it? The guy who runs the prison.
Is that's Scatman or whatever? What the guy that was in the Cheech and Chong movie?
Yeah.
I think he was Chong's father.
Well, I don't know. The warden, I suppose. So yeah, which is the way he wants it. So he gets.
Have you seen Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke?
I have never seen Cheech and Chong movies.
All right, just watch the first few minutes.
I'm not gonna watch it because I don't dig that humor. I don't dig the drug humor.
I'm not talking about the drug part. I'm talking about when Chong is with his parents. He's living with his parents, and that guy, the warden, I guess that's the warden from Cool Hand Luke, he's trying to get Chong to go get a job. And he was like, "When, boy? When?" And he's like exasperated. And
yeah. That guy is very...
It sets the tone for having a worthless child.
Yeah. Cheech and Chong is, I guess the poster boy for that sentiment. Yeah, no. And people may be like, "Oh, you don't like Cheech and Chong? What's wrong with you?" Because I know those are like technically classics, or maybe they're just cult classics. But yeah, not like I have Super Troopers, and I have come across so many people that have asked me, "Have I seen that movie?" And I say no, but I do own it. But I just can't like will myself to watch that film because it just seems like it would be a waste of about an hour and a half of my time, which my time is not that important, but I think our viewers' time and our listeners' time is a little bit more important. So let's go ahead and get on with it. We don't have our guest with us, so it's going to be Alan and I chatting it up about some things going on today and reflecting on our history to address those things. But before we get to that, if you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, whether it's on YouTube or you're listening on the podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, wherever. I know on Apple and Spotify, you can leave a review, a rating and review. That would be helpful. Do us a huge fave. We know you love us, so go ahead and do that. And go ahead and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and obviously YouTube.
Yeah,
and
do the
Instagram.
likes, the follows, do all that.
Yeah, do all of it. Do all the work for us for free.
And retweet.
Ooh, yeah, retweet. There we go.
Retweet us.
We get those every once in a while. It's fun to get them from big name people, which has happened a couple of times. Has not paid that big of dividends, but still pretty cool. Speaking of pretty cool people, I'm going to be speaking with or interviewing Gary Cooper's lone only child, his daughter, this coming week. What do you think about that?
Okay, bring up the whole High Noon story, because I think you and I discussed one time. I think the whole communism thing had to deal with the fact that he didn't have any of his friends supporting him. But I want to verify that if that was the big complaint about that particular movie, that nobody was there. When the
McCarthyism.
I'm gonna say this is that some of those people deserved what they got because they were confirmed by the Venona papers that they were indeed working with the Soviet Union.
Yeah, a few of them were found out. They were peddling an ideology that was highly detrimental, not just our country, but any country in the world, present and past. But yeah, it started to becoming a witch hunt, fishing expedition, if you will, and just got completely out of hand. But when people were like, oh, the Red Scare, look, the Red Scare was a Red Scare for very viable reasons. And so if people were like, well, that was blown out of proportion, I tend to sort of disagree with that. I think that it was not blown out of proportion. I just don't think a lot of things were done correctly. And we're going to address a lot of things going on in the country right now that are not being done correctly. Maybe you have the correct inkling, maybe you have even the best motives at heart, but you're doing it wrong.
And they're doing it in a way that they're not really being truthful as to what their intentions are. I've never really had a complaint against Bernie Sanders. I don't like his politics, but Bernie Sanders is truthful about who and what he is. But if you have somebody who proclaims to be a moderate and is pushing policies that definitely are not moderate, that are definitely far left or even far right, then that's where we're going to have a problem.
Speaking of being a moderate, Joe Manchin has hinted, wink and a nod, about possibly running for the presidency. I honestly would think about strongly. In fact, I would probably vote for him. That's me. I don't know where you fall on that, but I like Joe Manchin.
Listen, I like Joe Manchin.
He's a moderate because he says he's a moderate, and he is a moderate.
Yeah, but the problem I have with Joe Manchin is that sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. He kind of like when Anthony Kennedy or even John Roberts on the Supreme Court, he did give Biden the green light for his, I don't know if it was the Build Back Better or whatever. He was holding out, and Kristen Sinema of Arizona was holding out. But when he caved, and he even said himself that he was fooled, that he was promised stuff, and he should have known that he was going to be fooled. This is where I'm concerned about, what he believes is the role of the federal government. And that's why although I would prefer him over another Biden or Gavin Newsom, I would rather have a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul before I vote for a Manchin.
The thing is with Manchin is he's not beholden to his party. He's beholden to West Virginia. And I think because it's West Virginia, he remains a moderate. So there is like you said, be careful what you wish for. Once he gets to the point where he's no longer beholden to West Virginia, but to the populace, the American populace as a whole, you never know. He may be like, okay, now I can sort of let my guard down type of thing. Anyways,
if Tulsi Gabbard and Manchin ran the party, I would feel much better about the situation in our country.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard has my vote too. Happy Mother's Day to all you ladies out there. I know yesterday, Sunday, was Mother's Day. We hope that all of you had a wonderful, blessed day. You mothers out there, you're wonderful. Unless you're not. Unless you're a terrible mother, then get your act together. But I know my mother. I know your mother. Wonderful people. Beautiful people. The best on earth. The salt of the earth. So there you have it. Happy Mother's Day to all of you.
Yeah, too bad she doesn't know I'm her mom. She doesn't know that she's my mom.
Why you got to bring that up? Why do you have to bring it up?
She thinks my name is Raul, which concerns me because I don't know if there's a pool boy named Raul at that facility. So, that kind of concerns me just a bit.
What if you come into a room dressed up as a pool boy and say that your name is Raul, and she'll be like, "No, you're my son, Alan." A little reverse psychology.
This conversation can go in a very bad direction.
That's true. Your mother's been a lonely woman for quite some time.
Hey, that's my mom. That's my mom. Don't.
I thought that's where you were going with this.
No, that's why I'm trying to avoid this little
Okay,
rabbit hole.
okay. Well, I was just letting you know that I was following. I was picking up what you were putting down. All right, man. Well, let's get to it. You wanted to discuss on sort of the subject of, in today's terms, referring back to the Sons of Liberty, what would the Sons of Liberty do with a government that seems to be, I mean, this is not just federal government, this is also state governments and local governments, but we'll probably just tie in primarily the federal government, that is completely out of hand. What would they do?
Well, you know what caught my attention was that Marine and I the one who put the chokehold on that. I think his name is Jordan Neely.
No, that's the guy who died.
The one who died in the subway. He was attacking a lot of people, threatening a lot of people, and 3 people acted upon it. One of them was a former Marine.
Wasn't his name, didn't you say his name was Daniel Perry or whatever?
Yes. So, yeah, I know I wrote it down. It's in this list, but yeah, Daniel Perry is now going to be prosecuted by Alvin Bragg, and we'll get into more detail. But the reason why I wanted to have this discussion was that I noticed that people were saying, pray for Daniel Perry, pray for Daniel Perry. And I sat there and I thought about that, and I was like, okay, it's one thing to pray, but it's another to pray and not act and do something. So you're basically going to be, at the mercy of Alvin Bragg, and hope that he's going to be a nice guy and see the light and do the right thing. Is this what the Sons of Liberty would do? Would the Sons of Liberty just sit there and go, let's pray that the British will do something, or not the British, because they were all British. Let's hope that the government, that the Parliament, that the King will do the right thing. Governor Hutchinson will do the right thing. And when they realized their prayers were not being answered, they acted. And again, this is something we'll bring up as an event, a major event in American history. But this is what, the reason why I wanted to have this discussion. Would the Sons of Liberty just sit there and tell everyone to pray, or would they pray and act? And that's what this discussion. Now, before we have this discussion, I do want to say that there's a couple things that we are not recommending: tarring and feathering our opponents and sacking their homes. So I'm gonna, because I know somebody's gonna say, well, they sacked, Hutchinson's home and, that other guy's name, the one Oliver something, they sacked it. But although it wasn't the Sons of Liberty, they did egg them on. But those were mobs that did that. They just were kind of like, they encouraged somewhat to act. So
yeah, I
anyway,
mean, and isn't that the sort of the thin fine line that we're trying to walk here is between citizens demanding that the government employees do the right thing, and then mob justice or vigilante justice. Like there's the thin fine line of doing that, because we've seen vigilante justice over the past and mob justice over the past, well, definitely the past 5 to 6 years, really hit a fever pitch during the George Floyd riots. But we've, over the past, but technically we've seen this type of vigilante mob justice trying to persuade via force to make government employees, civil servants, and the government itself make decisions based on what the loudest part of the population wants. I mean, we can go back to the turn of the 20th century with the anarchists. We can go into the 60s and 70s with like Black Panther and Weather Underground and sort of domestic terrorist groups like that. And then we can even go into, into this 21st century over the past, you would say, decade. So there is a thin line. I think it's relatively thin because too many people get confused about, well, how far is too far? And we have some references, but at the same time, like this is revolutionary references. 1765, we wanted to start in 1765. This was really just the British colonists who perceived themselves and had always perceived themselves over the past 150 years prior as British citizens, all of a sudden having their citizen rights stripped away. And the most important is that which affects your economy, your personal economy, and that's the taxes. So this wasn't really like the revolution beginning. This was sort of a pushback and demands made on, hey, reinstitute our rights as citizens. And I think that that's sort of where we're wanting to go. We're wanting to start with, we're not pushing like revolutionary acts. We're pushing, hey, a 1765. We need to have a 1765 moment where we're saying, okay, you guys are just discarding the law in order to appease either your party member constituencies or an ideology. And that's sort of where we are.
Well, we also, the other thing that we want to bring up is that was there violence? Were there acts of violence? Yes, there were, but we are going to compare the difference between what happened during the American Revolution versus what's happening today. There is a difference. And, I think I'm going to make an attempt. I don't know about you, Dustin, but I'm going to make an attempt to say, okay, if you want to compare apples to apples, this is what you could do if you feel like harm is being inflicted or your rights are being violated and nothing is being done about it. So
then go ahead, take it away. Start with that. Start with your apples and oranges.
Yeah, we're only going to bring up a couple of them. There's a whole lot more, but we're just going to bring a few examples. The first one, like Dustin said, 1765. When the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act. Okay, now, people say, all right, what's the big deal? So they passed, a tax law. Well, a little bit more than that. What happened was that the colonists had their own taxing authority. So any taxes that were brought upon the people in the colonies was because they voted on delegates to represent them with their consent, and with their consent, those delegates, those representatives, they passed their own taxes, and that was something that the colonists complied and obeyed, those particular laws. Well, when British Parliament, who had absolutely no representatives from the colonies, started imposing taxes on the people, the concern, even though they were minute, like, for instance, the Tea Act was 3 pence per pound. That's it, 3 pence. That's nothing. But what people like Samuel Adams was saying is that if we allow them to stick a foot through the door, the next thing you know, they're going to stick a hand because they know they got away with it. And then they're going to stick their head. And then sooner or later, they're going to stick their entire body through the door. Same thing with the taxes. You let one tax slide, you allow it to happen, they're going to impose another one and another one. And even Samuel Adams did mention, if we let them get away with this, then they're going to, what's next? Are they going to tax our land? Are they going to tax our income? Are they going to, and he gave some examples. And let's face it, based on what we've seen, that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what government does. So the colonists were like, nope. And they met, the Sons of Liberty met, and they decided to organize. They planned a conference. They had a Stamp Act conference the following year, and they sent petitions to the king and to the parliament saying, look, we're still loyal subjects. However, you are imposing taxes on us and laws on us that we never consented to, and we're not going to comply. We're going to boycott. We're going to petition. We're going to protest. And the people did just that.
See, I want to interject here and mention that I mentioned your personal economy. That typically is something that will wake people up. Like even something, like every presidential election, like the economy is always number one on the list of concerns for citizens when they're voting. The economy is important, but what this is taxes affect your personal economy. But what it has to be is about the principle of undermining your sovereign right to be represented by your personal representative, by the House of Representatives, your personal in your district to be represented. It's sort of like when people complain about like the gun rights, right? So many times people get caught up in the idea of we need to be able to have our guns, our gun rights, that it becomes more about guns than the idea of self-defense and defense against your neighbor or mobs like we've seen so recently, or the government itself. It has to be about principle and not so much about individual items like your personal economy or your business economy. It has to be on principle, like you are affecting our rights as an individual, as a citizen, just like the guns, just like in guns and self-defense. You are undermining my very personal right to defend myself. It has to be about that before it is about guns. It has to be about representation before it's about the economic consequences. But I did want to mention
the number one right, which is an inalienable right. It's not a right given to us by the government. It's a right that we already have that the government is just there to protect, and that's the right of self-defense.
Right. Yeah, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you cannot defend yourself, then your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of happiness is all up for grabs. We've seen this. History is marked with this. You mentioned the states organized, the colonies organized, and they planned a conference. I wanted to ask you, because that was a time that pretty much those 13 colonies sort of viewed themselves very separately from each other, almost as obviously they were all under British rule. And
actually, you need to go beyond 13. We're looking more at I think it was 18 at the time. There were 18 colonies at the time.
Well, what I'm saying is
for instance, East Florida, West Florida, Quebec, Newfoundland. I mean, those were all considered just the same as the original 13. And in fact, at that conference, I think only 9 colonies showed up.
Well, my point being is they had ideals that they all agreed on, and they all agreed on specific things. So these were almost like 13 or 9 different countries coming together under the idea of specific principles. Hey, yes, we're under British rule, and this obviously extended into when you've got the Articles of Confederation. You were fighting the American Revolutionary War. But today, you have 50 states. And a lot of these states, governors, legislatures, they tend to view themselves as first belonging to the country instead of to themselves. And we are a state within a federal system and a union. Like, we're here by union. Do you think that that's even possible to go in with the same mentality as we did in 1765 under the idea of we're presenting principles? We're not so much presenting ourselves as states. And I think the reason I bring this up is that I think we've been so polluted as individual states to now just perceive ourselves as union, one country, and there's almost like no borders between states. So I think it makes it even more difficult for states to come together and do these types of things. What are your thoughts?
Well, there has been discussions about, there are some states that have stated or they have declared themselves as not complying. Some of the latest gun, I think Biden signed an executive order, and it had something to do with guns. I don't remember exactly what it was. Texas just said we are not complying because this was not something that was passed by Congress. It's I know Texas, Florida, many of the states said we're not complying. So And that's something that the states have that right to do. It's always been there because there have been states longer than there has been a federal government. And our federal government was created in it was ratified when, in 1788? Was that I think it was ratified in
1789. I want to say 1787. I think the
well, we had the first election was in 1788. So. But, that was a different government. That we were under the Articles of Confederation. We were not a republic at that time. We were a confederacy, or a confederation of states. So the government that we have today has been around since 1788 or 1789.
Well,
states have been around longer than that.
You mentioned the states coming together, but it's always the same. Like, go back to the Obama administration. Obama would put something out that the red states didn't like, so they would, the AGs, the attorneys general, would come together and sue the federal government. Trump comes in, and the AGs of the blue states would come together and sue the government. Now you're having the same exact thing that happened under Obama happen with Biden, where the red states come together, the attorneys generals come together and sue. It seems like just political pandering instead of it just seems like a separation. Like it's red and blue, and it's not about the principles, it's about the politics. And that's what is so irritating, because people like you and I and the average citizen sees this. And like, why are you suing? Are you suing because of the principles? Or are you suing because it's political gamesmanship? It's like you and I talk about this all the time, where we get so irritated. You and I are conservatives, and we get so irritated when Republican congressmen, congresswomen get in front of the camera and showboat and say, we're going to fight against this and we're going to do this. And we know that it's just talk. It's political speech. That's it. And that is what I keep seeing with, we're coming together and we're suing the federal government. Really? Like,
well, it's a waste of time. I say, don't even bother. Just don't comply.
Yeah.
Just don't comply. Try to enforce a law that we don't believe in, that we believe is unconstitutional, that the federal government is overstepping their boundaries. Just don't comply. What are they going to do? Are they going to send federal troops?
Yeah.
Because that's what they'll end up having to do. What are we going to? Are we going to beg for more money? Please let us keep more of our money. Believe me, and this was something that Madison and Jefferson both talked about. If you look at, there was like the Virginia and the Kentucky resolves. I think that's what they're called, where they were like, the states trump the federal government in certain things. If it's not a power that was delegated to the federal government, they have no right to say or do anything about it. And and one of the things that we're going to talk about is going to be the whole immigration and naturalization. That's one of the topics that we were going to go to. I want to finish this part of it and go on to the next one, and then we can get more.
Yeah, I know, but this is a conversation, so we're going to have a conversation. I'm not going to have you preach to me. You hear me?
Look, man, if you don't comply, I'm going to have my own show. I'm going to secede from the Sons of History. Although, you know what? That probably wouldn't work too well.
What would it be called?
Well, I don't know, the prodigal son of history.
How about the pool boy of history?
The Raoul of no.
All right, go ahead, man.
No, the whole idea of us seceding is inconceivable.
Well, here's the thing: is you say refuse to comply, and I see this in a lot of ways where you have states do this. And they're like, no, we're not complying with that. We're not complying with these federal laws. So if you want to send in your federals and your feds and try to, enforce this, yeah, go right ahead. There are so many things that are irritating to me when it comes to non-compliance. But one of the things that we seem to always have to comply with is the taxations. And the states are just as much of the problem as the federal government when it comes to taxation because, like you said, they take federal money. If states stopped taking federal money, billions, tens of billions of dollars every year, then one, that would stop that. It's not a leak. It's just a complete gushing, money water hose. And if they just turned off that spigot, well, that would put more money back in our pocket. But the states are in cahoots with the federal government. Keep sending us money. Whose money is it? It's not the federal government's money. It's the federal government that they take our money and then they put it right. It's money laundering on a political level. That's with our money.
We're begging them to get can we have some of our money back? We want more of our money, please,
Yeah. Here's $600.
Yeah.
Like, what a complete slap in the face that was. I couldn't believe that was. I was like, this is incredible. You're sending billions and billions of dollars. That was one of the things, like when we had Peter Zion on the show last season, who I'm a huge fan of, and he didn't really. I asked him about his thoughts on sending all these billions of dollars to these other countries during the pandemic, and he didn't really seem to know about that. And I was like, here it is. We're signing bills and sending off billions of dollars. Obviously, we're recouping that hopefully back, but some of these are pretty much failed states. So no, you're not. They're getting billions and billions of dollars. They're not citizens. They're just citizens of the world, if you will. But they're not American citizens. And yet they had the gall to give people a $600 check while they shut down everybody's businesses, except for the huge businesses. Slap in the face, and people took it. And that's what I'm saying. People refuse to comply on certain things. The left, when it comes to the left, and the young people on the left, typically refuse to comply on stuff that have nothing to do with the Constitution, nothing to do with practiced common law, nothing to do with that. It's all about privileges, and that's it.
Well, if you look in here in Houston, in Harris County, our so-called county judge Lena Hidalgo, told everybody, if you see a business opened that's not supposed to be, report them. Okay, that sounds a little familiar, don't you think? I'm not going to mention any businesses, but I know several businesses that defied Harris County. They did open. You had to there were certain things you had to do to get in order to get in. The doors were locked, but yes, I did find several businesses that defied Harris County, defied Lena. So that's how you do it. And there comes a point where if you know that, we're talking about things that are unconstitutional, clearly unconstitutional. The government can only do what it does if we comply. And, and that's why the subject is, what would the Sons of Liberty do? The Sons of Liberty clearly saw things that were against, their rights. There was a Bill of Rights, the British or English Bill of Rights. And, if they felt that it was being violated, they didn't just sit there and say, oh, let's pray about it. I mean, I don't have anything against prayer. I mean, I pray myself, but I do it more for communication rather than asking for anything. But, God gave us a brain and 2 feet to get up, walk, and go let our officials know this is not right. This is unconstitutional. This is against our rights of self-defense, right to worship, the right to pursue happiness, the right to work, everything. It violates our rights. And if we sit there and we comply because, we happen to like that politician, then we're really only doing it to ourselves. And I saw a lot of that during the whole COVID pandemic, yelling and screaming at somebody, demanding that they, wear their mask properly. Cover your nose, I've heard so many people say. And then, and I'm not going to mention any companies, but, when Biden said that if you have a company of over, I don't know what the number was, 60 people, 100 people, then you have to vaccinate those employees. No. And I was prepared to quit my job or let them fire me because I was not going to get the COVID vaccine. I literally was defying. I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but
No, but
suffice it to say that there was defiance on my part.
And to that point, people will say, "Oh, you're an anti-vaxxer," and there goes back to the guns, to self-defense, the economic impact to taxes. It's about the principle. Like, it's not about the vaccine. It's about being forced to take a medicine of any kind. Like, when you go to a doctor and you have type 2 diabetes and he prescribes to you insulin or other things, you have every right to not take that. You have every right to not take it. And that's where the line was totally crossed, which was you have no choice in the matter. And people will say, well, it wasn't forced upon you. You didn't have a gun to your head. Like, well, you had a gun in the shape of a dollar bill, if you will. If you started saying, you know what, we're not complying as a business owner of a large business, right? If you said we're not complying with this, they were going to fine you into oblivion and shut you down. Like, therefore, yeah, technically you have a gun to your head. And people went with it. That's what was so wild. Is so many people, big name people who should know better, in the words of Ronald Reagan, people who knew better went with it. And it went right back to what I was talking about with the attorneys general, where they pick a side, a political side, and this became strictly political while those who were saying, don't make this political, made it completely political. That's what was so incredibly irritating.
Well, the good thing about what the Americans did in the 1760s and 1770s is they organized, and they, like I said, there were boycotts, protests, and the officials vastly underestimated the resolve of the American people, and they had to bend. They got rid of the Stamp Act. They realized the writing on the wall was, we're going to have a whole rebellion on our hands. Now, they did throw out the I think it was called the Declaratory Act, where Parliament said, hey, we're Parliament, and if we want to raise taxes or if we want to pass a bill and impose it on you, then it's our right. This one time we'll let you have it, but we're going to be back. And that's exactly what they did. Shortly after that, they passed the, I don't know if it's called the Townsend or Townshend Act. I never did, but it's spelled Townsend.
That seems to be the tactic that our government has taken, which is we are able to tax or pass laws regarding you in anything whatsoever, and you must comply. Like, no, that's not. That is a dictatorship. That is a monarchy without parliament. That is a totalitarian form of government. That's not what we live under. We live under a federal republic, federal system, and a republic. And I tell you, here's what is a concern to me. Because I think the economies run everything, every decision. You said it yourself. You have a brain and you've got 2 feet. Therefore, you're able to vote with your feet, whether that's going to a restaurant or whether that's staying in a city or a state. And you've had so many people, I've run into so many, we're out here in Texas. I've run into so many people from California, Oregon, and Washington, the West Coast. Like, they're just coming in like droves. And it's because the government has become so, it's an untenable situation. Or like, we can't live here anymore. I've got no problem with that going on. I've got no problem with people able to move from state to state in a better, sort of like in a search for a better life. And sadly, like we talk about people in Latin America coming over here in search of a better life. Like, we've got people crossing state lines in search of a better life. And that's pathetic. Not for them, but for those state governments doing that. My point being is it's all for naught if the federal government continues to pour in money to those states and bails them out and helps them out and sustains that poor government. That's the real problem. And therefore you wipe out the economic impact of addressing the removal of governors, legislators, all of that. Because now they're safely in power because the economic impact isn't where it should be. That's my problem.
Now sometimes, there are government policies will actually lead people to break laws. I don't know what the whole war on drugs. I think for me, I think it appears obvious that the war on drugs is a failure, and we need to rethink the whole policy, the whole keeping certain things illegal when it's clear that people want it. I mean, we saw that in the the 20s with prohibition. But back in those days, there was a system known as mercantilism, where you could only purchase items or sell items through British ports. Now what happened was that led to smuggling, and in order to enforce the laws to prevent smuggling, the British Parliament sent the Navy and they sent the Army to enforce the laws. Now, this led to one event known as the Gatsby Affair. There was a ship called the HMS Gatsby that patrolled Rhode Island, and they were chasing a smuggler. The ship was known as the Hannah, and it ran aground. Well, the people organized, and there were some Sons of Liberty there. One of the guys named John Brown, and I think he's the one. He had something to do with Brown University. He might have opened Brown University, but John Brown and about 55 other men rowed boats out to the Gatsby before the tide came in, and they captured the ship. Now there was a fight, and Dudington was shot in the crotch, but once they surrendered and the ship was captured, they evacuated Dudington and all the guys. They tended to Dudington. He did survive, but Dudington was kind of an abusive guy. So they did evacuate all the men, but then they torched the ship. So the Gatsby went up in flames. Now, here's the deal, and we're going to do it. Like I said, we're going to do a compare and contrast. The 55 men that rowed out there stopped the problem, which was they disabled Dudington and they got rid of the weapon that was used against them, which was the Gatsby. They didn't go and attack. They didn't, what's the word, dox? They didn't dox the families of the sailors. They did not destroy their careers. They put a stop to, like if you use deadly force, the deadly force is used to stop the crime. You can't go and chase the person and go and kill him. If he committed a crime, you can't go chase him down, hunt him, find him in his home, and kill him. The deadly force is only used for stopping a crime itself. Like if you see someone beating up another person to death, your job is to stop the beating. Well, that's what they did with the Gatsby. They put an end to the abuses that were committed by the Gatsby and by Dudington. Now, the same thing happened about a year later, and we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, where there was a monopoly on tea. It was the British were forcing everyone to drink one kind of tea from I think it was it the East India Company, and they imposed a tax. It was a really low tax, 3 pence per pound, and and that made tea cheaper than the smuggled tea. Well, again, even though it was going to make life easier on the colonists, they also knew that if we allow this tax, which we did not consent, if we allow even this tax, which is a very low tax, if they're sticking that hand through the door, then the next thing we know is that whole arm is going to come through, and they're going to keep going, and they're going to keep going. I mean, let's face it, when the income tax was first imposed on Americans, I don't think it was the rate that we're using today. I mean, I think somewhere like between a quarter to a third of our taxes, of our income, is taxed. when the income tax was created about 110 years ago, it wasn't even that close. But it has slowly just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So even though it was a 3 pence tax, they're like, no. So there were three ships. All the tea that went to all the different ports were sent back. In Charlestown, South Carolina, it's called Charlestown at the time. They let the tea sit on the dock and rot. But in Massachusetts, at the port of Boston Harbor, you had a governor named Thomas Hutchinson who he refused to send the tea back. So what was going to happen was that the tea would have to be unloaded, and when it's unloaded, the people of Boston, the people of Massachusetts had to pay the tax. So the Sons of Liberty said, look, either get rid of the ships or else, send the tea back or else. Hutchinson said, screw you. So,
and see that right there.
But hold on. Let me finish. Let me finish my point.
But I'm just saying,
let me finish my point.
I know, but you'll go on for 10 years.
I just want to state this part.
Okay.
Is that the Sons of Liberty said, okay, fine, if that's how it's going to work, about 150 men boarded the three ships. They destroyed the tea. They did not hurt anyone. They did not destroy the ships. They did not destroy any businesses. They did not destroy any homes. They destroyed the tea. Then they cleaned up the ships. And then they went home. Now compare that to what BLM and Antifa does, where they destroy they've attacked people, they've killed people, they've burned homes, they've burned businesses. There's the difference between what the Sons of Liberty did and what groups like Antifa and the BLM are doing.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for finishing up and then throwing me off of what I was going to say. But anyways, going back to Hutchinson was the type of politician that we have today who is more attuned to his or her party or federal government compliance, trying to be in good with the government, like Hutchinson with the king in Parliament, wanting to do as Great Britain wanted, instead of who he really was supposed to be representing, which was the people. That's the difference in what a good politician or stateswoman is supposed to be doing, is representing their constituents. That's the problem, is we've got too many who are trying to please the party or please big government and agencies, that they're ignoring people, but at the same time saying, oh no, we're trying to do what's best for you, which is, talking out of both sides of your mouth. To your point, let me ask you this. Do you think, because you brought up BLM and Antifa, and their methods of going way too extreme and violent extremism, do you think that the police station that was set on fire, I think in Minnesota, is a sort of equal or adjacent to setting the Gatsby on fire?
I'll say this. There was an event that took place in France, July 14 of 1789. They commemorate it today. It's called Bastille Day. If the police station was used to violate human rights, if it was a place where they were beating prisoners, if they were beating not convicts, but people who were arrested, then absolutely I would say that torching the police station was the proper thing to do, because that police station was being used to violate inalienable rights, human rights, constitutional rights. But what I would say is, the Sons of Liberty, when they destroyed the tea, or when they torched the Gatsby, all they did was they got rid of the Gatsby, because the Gatsby was the problem. And this is a military ship. These were not police. This was not a police cruiser. This was a military ship. This was martial law. Now, they weren't under martial law, but I mean that's really what you have. We have in the United States, we have posse comitatus. Posse comitatus prevents the military, the U.S. military, from enforcing civil laws unless it's an insurrection. Well, it was a violation of, even though it wasn't a law then, it was a violation of posse comitatus because you had a military ship enforcing civilian laws. So they destroyed the ship, game over, and that was it. And everybody went home after that. So that, I think that would probably be the best way to look at it, is look at what happened on Bastille Day. The Bastille was a symbol. Bastille was used to violate rights. And if that's what the police station, if that's what was going on in the police station, then tell me if I'm wrong. That's me personally. I would have been like, hey, you know what? You're doing stuff in there that you're not supposed to be doing. Now, if they went on and they kept doing other things, I mean, they're burning businesses.
Yeah, see, that's
not cool.
But here's the thing, like, I think there are sort of three separate sections. So you have the Gatsby that is torched, but it doesn't give you the right to go burn the entire fleet, right? So you're not going to go and like, okay, now every military ship and every military station has to be burned, right? It's too extreme. But at the same time, those two are still in the same ballpark, if you will, because they're both part of the government, right? It's like that police station, okay, you burned it down, but that doesn't mean that you can go burn down other police station or municipal courts or whatever, And I'm not saying that burning down that police station was right or wrong. That's a completely different conversation. But what I'm saying is you bring in the citizen, like the civilian businesses, private businesses. BLM and Antifa started going after private businesses, which for them, their ideology is very anti-private property, right? So private property is also seen as the problem. So they cross that line into, okay, no longer are you really about justice for the individual citizens as far as like that separation between, what the state can do to private citizens. Now you're going after the private citizens who you are supposedly in favor of. And I think that's the difference in the ideology between today's groups of like BLM and Antifa and the Sons of Liberty. They were all about the private citizen. They were all about citizens' rights so they never attacked people's businesses, except when maybe like those business owners actually were in cahoots with the government. We saw that.
That did happen where some of the
tarring and feathering
and
stuff like that.
Some of the men who ended up becoming called loyalists later on, yes, their businesses may have been boycotted. I'm not saying that there weren't any that were not destroyed. Right now I can't think of any that were destroyed, and I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I do know that they were boycotted. There were many businesses that were boycotted. And that's our right.
But that's the rights of the people. That's the rights of the people to do that. And I think that we've done a good job of boycotting individual businesses. The problem is we can't boycott the federal government. Like, they're already in our pocket. And now that we are pretty much completely digital, a digital currency, they're completely in our pocket. Like, so they can pretty much do whatever they want to do, and it's very difficult to do anything about it, which is why going strictly digital in your currency, that's a completely different story, but that's the risk of going completely digital with our currency.
Yeah, they even here's the thing is that the federal government has encroached on just about everything in our lives, and that was not the intentions. There was a group of men known as the AntiFederalists, and who are the AntiFederalists? Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, Richard Henry Lee, who was the man who introduced the resolution to declare independence, and a whole lot more who were very wary about the idea of a strong central government, and they warned everybody, if we're afraid of trading one tyrant 3,000 miles away for a whole bunch of tyrants in our backyard. And that is exactly, that's what the Federalist Papers were. You had James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay saying, don't worry, it's all the things that the Anti-Federalists are saying is not going to happen. Well, they unfortunately had, too much confidence in the government and in the people who consented to all these new powers, which the federal government was never supposed to have.
Well, it's like Thomas Sowell always says, there's only one thing that the government is good at, and that's expanding. And so I don't want to say inevitable, but the inevitable took place where the government was just going to expand. So now they've been dealing so long with things that have nothing to do with the Constitution, that now, like you said, they are in every aspect. They're in every aspect of our life. They have a say in every single thing that we do. And that was never supposed to be the way it is. And I will say this, people say, we need to get rid of the 16th Amendment. We need to get rid of the 17th Amendment, or anything like post 15th Amendment we need to get rid of. And I'm like, okay, I can agree with that. Okay, let's just say that takes place. Well, we also have to keep in mind that all of those amendments are now constitutional, and those are decided upon not just by the federal government. That was decided upon by the states and the people. So people like to give Woodrow Wilson a hard time, and we do on this show. We're not fans of Woodrow Wilson. I think he's a tragic figure, but it's beside the point. But people say, yeah, the 16th Amendment and the 17th Amendment, Woodrow Wilson. I'm like, dude, he just signed it. That's all he did. So that had to go through a ton of steps in order to get to his desk. So people need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, the bad thing is today we have a compliant media that they're cheerleaders for many of our political leaders. And they're not telling us the truth. They're really not. I mean, I remember watching Walter Cronkite, and I thought what he said was gospel. Found out later on, not so. He did have his own beliefs, and he let it be known. He didn't like blurt out certain things, but the way he reported. When you look back now, you can kind of see it.
Well, that's why he was considered the most trusted man in America, because there were so few outlets to contradict him.
And nobody questioned him.
Yeah.
Nobody ever questioned him.
Well, he was getting fed the same material that everybody else was. I think Bob Woodward did a good job of breaking that down in one of his books of how the CIA and the FBI and the federal government fed information to these outlets and had them parroting everything, or would I say mockingbirding everything that they wanted out there. So yeah, and they're all in the same thing.
There were times, people say, well, what are we going to do? What should we do? Well, I'm gonna, and we'll talk about some of the abuses, but there's two other events that people need to look at, in which the people did something. They stood up and they defied the authorities. There were two examples. Both of them happened in 1775. The first one was known as the Salem Gunpowder Raid. Governor, now this is when Thomas Hutchinson was forced to flee Massachusetts, and British General Thomas Gage took over. What he did was he sent redcoats, regulars, violating what we'd now call the Posse Comitatus. He sent British redcoats up to the city of Salem, where the witches were, and tried to confiscate arms and powder and munitions. Well, the whole city turned out and stood in their way and kept them. They delayed them for quite some time, but eventually an agreement was made. But they peacefully stood their ground, stood in front of the redcoats, would not let them pass. And it was a show of force that the British soldiers and Thomas Gage could not ignore. So about 7 weeks later, Thomas Gage was going to do something very similar, only this time, instead of doing it in the middle of the day, he tried to do it in the middle of the night to kind of sneak across, Boston Harbor, in the Charles River, and land and march on Lexington and Concord. mostly Concord. And this is when Dawes and Revere did their midnight ride to warn everybody: the regulars are out. The regulars are out. Turn out your militia. And it was the same thing where they were going to march to Concord and they were going to go and capture some arms and munitions and powder. And again, the militia stood their ground. Now, in what happened in Lexington, they were not standing in the way. They were off to the side in the park. They called it the Lexington Green. And the British marched out towards them, and that's where the fighting erupted. But had the soldiers just kept going, there would not have been a fight at Lexington. And probably what would happen in Concord is all the munitions would have been gone by then. I mean, there was some stuff that were captured, but these were examples of people standing their ground and defying the government and saying, no, we're not. This is BS. You're not going to sit here and march your soldiers, onto our property, onto our land, and take away our right to self-defense. That's how the Revolutionary War started. Now, how do we compare that to today? I'm going to mention this one person because this is one of my best examples, and there are going to be other examples. But the New York District Attorney, Alvin Bragg. Okay, this guy has turned felonies into misdemeanors. New York now is a very dangerous place. I think it was last year, or it might have been earlier this year. There was a 61-year-old man named Jose Alba who worked in what was known as a bodega, which is like a corner market, and this 35-year-old guy named Austin Simon started beating him up, and Jose Alba stabbed him. He was defending himself. You could clearly see it in the videos. The 61-year-old man defends himself and kills the 35-year-old Austin Simon, who, my understanding, had a long rap sheet to begin with. Well, Alvin Bragg is like, I'm going to press charges against Jose Alba. There was such an outcry that even the mayor was like, no, don't do this. This is bad for politics. So Alvin Bragg relented. Now, this is the same guy that's going after Donald Trump for felonies that aren't felonies and for crimes that aren't, state crimes. If they're even crimes, they're under the federal government. They'd be something that the federal government would pursue, not a local government. But now Alvin Bragg is in something that we mentioned. Jordan Neely he punched a 67-year-old woman just out of the blue, punched her, and he's thrown people onto subway tracks. He's verbally and physically abused people on the subway. And he was doing that, and Daniel Perry was minding in his own business until people got scared. And so Daniel Perry, the former Marine, and two other guys held Jordan Neely down because they had enough. They had enough. This guy's been arrested, 40 times? 40 times? And the people had enough. And three guys tackled him, and Daniel Perry had the chokehold, and he died. Okay, big loss. Well, to Alvin Bragg, he decides to press charges against Daniel Perry. Now, do we pray for Daniel Perry? Of course, but is that enough? No. I think the people of New York need to do what the people of Salem and the people of Lexington and Concord did. March and protest and say, no, not on our watch. We are not going to allow you to do this. That's my...
And I think that goes right back to the principles. Like a Daniel Perry, a type like that, where it's just like, you can't think that you can just terrorize people and get away with it. And people think that nowadays. They do believe that you can actually terrorize people to the point until you become a mass shooter. And this Jordan Neely character, the only thing that is his saving grace is apparently that he went around dancing like Michael Jackson on Subway sometimes, which is a sure sign that you've lost your mind, right? But I mean, you've been arrested how many times? You've assaulted how many people? you are begging. Like that's like a potential mass shooter right there. And people were like, well, they will defend him. They'll defend people like that until that person becomes, say, a mass shooter. And I'm not saying Jordan Neely was going to be a mass shooter, but people like that become mass shooters or killers. And it's like you wait till that point, and then what happens is people don't start talking about a Jordan Neely who goes around, or somebody who's not lost their mind and goes around and starts shooting people. No, they start blaming the guns, and that's where we have lost our sight. And I say we. There are so many Americans that are on the side of what we're talking about, that agree with what we're talking about. They are the pushback. They are the ones that understand the principles of the American system, of the constitutional rights. They understand those principles. So I don't want people to think that you and I feel like we're the only ones crying out in the wilderness. We know that probably to an extent we are part of the majority, I would say. But there are millions of people in this country who will go to social media, go to Twitter, and defend somebody like a Jordan Neely, or they will not condemn like a mass shooter, but they will condemn the idea of guns and not understand that guns in particular it's a principle of self-defense. It's not about the guns. It's about that person who is nuts out of their mind and is completely violent. And we've lost sight of that because I think we have raised a generation that doesn't understand the idea of principles. They understand the idea of party politics and ideologies. That's where I think we are in a really bad situation. And that idea only gets echoed by our politicians, somebody like a district attorney, Alvin Bragg. That's the danger that we're in.
All right, now what do you think about, because I know we were going to talk about the border crisis. For me, I have I've read, and I've taken classes regarding the Constitution, and it clearly states that states deal with immigration, and the federal government deals with naturalization. Who becomes a U.S. citizen? Right now we have the border crisis. Title 42 expired, and our worthless Mayorkas, Department of Homeland Security, who could extend. Or he could enforce look, the border wall was shut down on day one. Biden shut it down. So we have estimates 700,000 are lined up against the border. We have 80,000 coming through Guatemala right now. Mayorkas, the eunuch, is acting all like, I don't know what, this is all the Republicans' fault. Here's the problem is that, like the state of Texas, it's our towns, it's our border towns that are being flooded with people. Now, the state of Texas is going to be paying for their housing, their medical care, their schooling. They're going to come here to Harris County and, they're going to say, we need to raise your taxes because we need to build more schools. We have an influx of children. We have to educate them. Well, I have a problem with that because that's my tax dollars and I did not invite them in. So, we're footing the bill. We're having to pay for all this stuff. So, DeSantis of Florida and Abbott of Texas have decided that, we're going to start sending these people to blue states. We're going to send them to blue cities like Philadelphia, Chicago, New York. DeSantis sent 50 migrants to Martha's Vineyard, and they shit their pants over 50 people.
Yeah, Chicago has said that they've got an immigration crisis. The gall of these people, like, you think you have an immigration crisis? You're freaking right next to the Canadian border practically. What are you talking about? Insane.
Right, so it's, this, like state of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, we're having California even it's having to take all these people in. We don't have they need jobs. Well, when you have that many people, guess what? Wages go down because if you've got 1,000 people wanting 10 jobs, then the employer's like, hey, you know what? Instead of paying these people $15 an hour, which is what they want, we'll charge, what's the minimum wage? 7 something? Let's just charge them 7 something because they'll take that job. They'll take it. So people who are Americans, who are low or unskilled Americans, their wages go down. They're not going to get that 15 an hour. They're going to be paid minimum wage.
And here's what's interesting to what you're saying is people will use this as a claim of racism, right? Like, oh, you're not paying these people a wage that you would pay a white person. It's just like, no, it's low cost labor. It's unskilled labor, and it's labor that doesn't require health care, and it doesn't require, like, they don't even have green cards. Like, this is what we're talking about. Like, this goes back to 1880s where you had the Chinese Exclusion Act because you had just ended slavery. So you had, the free labor movement, and then you had the Chinese coming in the droves into California and the West Coast, and people started going in upward. Why? Because it dropped everybody's wages. This is exactly what's going to go. And it's not so much like racism. Obviously, there's going to be racist tendencies with that because it's affecting your pocketbook, but it has less to do with that and has more to do with the economic impact, the individual economic impact. And we're going to be hit with this. And the thing is people will make the argument like, well, these people are trying to escape, poverty or violence and different stuff. Like, look, I agree with all those arguments. I really do. Like, let's just say, like, if I was in El Salvador or if I was being hunted down by the cartels of Mexico, I would be wanting to get over here as soon as possible. I'm not disagreeing with that. What the problem is the principle of free movement stops at the borders because these are sovereign states. These are sovereign nations. Mexico, El Salvador, America, like Canada, like these are all sovereign nations. So you have to abide by these laws that these sovereign nations have. Otherwise we're not sovereign and it's a free-for-all and it's chaos. But do I think that, here's my personal opinion. I think that there's room enough for whoever wants to really come into this country, as long as they are willing to pay taxes, pay taxes on their labor. And hopefully they will be on sort of our side with, hey, let's have lower taxes. And let's not tax everything, right? Let's, whatever. But it's like, I don't know who said it, but they were like, I think it was one of the border agents were saying the federal government doesn't need to send border agents. They need to send judges so that they can hear all of these cases and get these people processed. And whether processed and naturalized over an extended period of time or sent back. But we've got a crisis and we can say, well, these people they don't have a right to come into this country, but they have every reason to. That's the difference. And that's where I think a lot of people get confused.
I think there's a little bit more than that. They're being told, if you come here, you're going to get a free phone. You're going to get that. Your kids will be educated. You'll get the housing. You'll get the medical care. That's where we have to. It's more than saying you just need to pay your taxes. First of all, we have to keep in mind that when you have an influx of people, wages will go down. So you have to keep it kind of organized in that, all right, so how many people do we want to bring into this country? And there is a line. You have to stand in line. Sorry, but that's the rules. Now, if you are being attacked, okay, there are other countries in North America, in South America. Go to Venezuela. Isn't it supposed to be a socialist paradise? They have free healthcare, do they not? Go to Venezuela. Go to Brazil. Go to Argentina. Go to Peru. We're not the only country. Go to Canada. Why do you have to come to the United States? And, I might add, quit incentivizing them to come here. That's number one. Number two, instead of sending judges, I'm going to disagree with you here. I think there's a little bit more to it than that. If it's indeed an asylum case, the fact that they're in Mexico now means that they really can't. Asylum means you need to get away from the country where you're having a problem. Asylum doesn't mean that you can travel through Mexico and then come here. Now, if like back when we had the Berlin Wall, and let's say you were in Bucharest or East Berlin or Prague, and you fled into the U.S. Embassy. Okay, that's or the Cubans, because the Cubans, that's a bona fide case where they can't cross the border. Cuba's an island, so they make it to the United States. Okay, you're here. That's an asylum case that I will agree with. But if you travel through Mexico, you travel through Guatemala, you're from El Salvador to get here, you really need to go stay in Honduras or go live in go to Panama, go to Costa Rica. So why would we have to send so many judges down to the border to process them? I can understand some, but don't send an army of judges down there. Don't send an army to process migrants. Send an army to stop them from entering the country, just like the people stood in front of the British soldiers to prevent them from crossing, and capturing the stores, the cash, the military stores. Stand in defiance. That's what our army needs to do. That's what our National Guard needs to do. That's what our Border Patrol needs to do. Don't open the gates for them and change the babies' diapers and process, 100,000. We had, 4 million last year? Or not last year. Since Biden took over, we had somewhere around 4 to 5 million people come into this country. Our Border Patrol, our border agents are so busy processing that the cartels are sending them through helping them cross the Rio Grande and sneaking into this country.
Well, maybe might be best to just have the CIA overthrow some of these poor governments and help establish a more democratic and capitalistic form of government and economy in these Latin American states. Maybe that'll help.
Didn't Ann Coulter said, we need to invade their countries, kill their leaders, and convert the people to Christianity?
Did she say that?
Yep. But I think she said it, I think it was kind of a joke. But, look.
I think they're already converted to Christianity.
And I know I'm gonna wrinkle some feathers here. I'm gonna probably piss off some people when I say this.
Well, let this be the last thing we say, because the show's coming to an end.
All right. The people who are fleeing from this country, I hate to say it, they need to fix their own country. If your leader, if let's say you have a family, okay? If your father is abusive, you need to do something about it. I hate to say it, but you need to do something about it. The wives need to kick him out. I know people say, "Oh, it's not that easy." I know that. I don't know what it's like to be in an abusive relationship where your husband comes home drunk and beats on you and beats on the kids. I don't know. But what I do know is that if you don't do something, he's going to keep doing it. And, these governments in Central America and South America who are abusive, like what's going on in Venezuela, the people of the Venezuelans, I love them, but they need to fight. They need to overthrow their government. They need to be the ones to overthrow their government. Don't just sit there. Do what the Sons of Liberty would do. Well, get rid of them. I don't care how.
What happens when your little brother sides with your dad, or your big brother sides with your dad? That's what happens. It's not like these Latin American states or even our country. And during the revolution, everybody was on board.
But that's not an excuse to keep the status quo.
I'm not saying that, but it makes it way more difficult. And we live in a very different time where we're talking muskets and cannon. We're talking freaking, machine guns and 50 cows, different stuff like that.
I know it's difficult.
People who are already disarmed, who have already made the mistake of being disarmed.
Okay, well, here's the thing. We fought an 8-year war to free ourselves from Britain, and then we fought them again in 1812 to finally get them to respect our sovereignty. Okay, 8 years of war.
Yeah.
That's a long time. That is a long time.
And
now,
you and I discussed the other night, how many times has that worked out?
What's
Once.
that? A revolution?
Yeah, once. Us.
Well, no, I mean, if you're talking about long lasting, okay, yeah, I can kind of see that, but
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But that's because we created a stable government.
That's because we already had 150 years of experience running ourselves.
Well, okay, but when you had the revolutions in France and Spain and Russia, their experience was far longer than 150 years.
Yeah,
but what they did was you had one abusive government replaced by another abusive government.
Who ran up against the French?
What do you mean?
Who ran up against the French? That was an uprising of the impoverished people, right? And then they became run by the intellectuals, the intelligentsia, who sold them down the river.
Right, but the French
Same thing with the
did
Russians.
that to themselves.
Same thing with the
French
Russians. The thing with our country, I think we had like a 90% literacy rate when we started running, the American Revolution.
I don't know. I don't think it was that high.
It was very high because everybody read the Bible.
Well, I mean, you may be right. I don't know what the literacy rate. That's not something that I studied. But what I will say is that what made America, and there've been a lot of authors.
Let's just say our literacy rate rivals Cuba's.
Okay, but literacy rate is not going to guarantee that that's going to create a good revolution, because some of the worst people in the world were intellectuals.
No, I'm saying literacy rate doesn't mean, just because you can read doesn't make you an intellectual. It just makes you
No.
capable.
I'm saying just because you're an intellectual doesn't mean that you're going to create something good.
That's what I just said about the French and the Russians.
What I'm saying is that what made the American Revolution different, that so many people have written when they compared like the American Revolution against the French Revolution, was that the American revolutions believed in individual rights, whereas the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution was a collective right where the people answered to the government. The people served the government, whereas what made the American Revolution work is the fact that it was a good revolution in that it wasn't an oppressive government. You had individual rights. Not so with the French. I mean, God, you heard about the terror that took place.
The French were more individualistic than we were. The Russians were not.
No. Their revolution was collective. They didn't believe in individual rights.
What about the Rights of Man? Written by
who? Thomas
Paine? Yeah.
Yeah, he was. Hold on. Thomas Paine was imprisoned. Monroe had to go rescue him. James Monroe had to go rescue him. They went after a lot of people. They went after what's his name? Lafayette.
Right.
So they went. No, theirs was if you showed any inkling of being against the government, then you were executed. So many people who even supported the French Revolution were executed.
Right, and that's why I say that they turned against their own movement, because they were about individual rights. They hated the monarchy. They hated the government. And that's the problem. That's always the promise, is like the Russians, like Lenin and those guys and Trotsky, like they were all about, you'll have more rights and you'll have, we'll take care of you and you'll be your own person, but we're going to... When they actually won their revolution, they took everything away from her. Like, they're all about broken promises. Ours was about fulfilled promises, at least in a percentage or a per capita basis, way more than those other revolutions. Eventually, we sort of got it right.
Well, there was a group,
but even that took a long time.
I think they were called the sans culottes, the without pants. I think that's what it translates, the sans culottes. But they would be equivalent today to, like, I would say my guess would be that they're equivalent to like some of the Antifa folks. They were the proletariat, and they were a pretty powerful group during the French Revolution. Everybody in the French Revolution were seeking power for themselves. Again, this is where the whole individual liberty comes in. This is where, the states came in, where the states, France was, a nationalized, centralized power, whereas the United States, you had 13 different countries who had a general government. It was called a general government that only had certain enumerated powers. They could only do certain things. Now, it wasn't until the Civil War where the government really expanded its powers. And by then, we had already had established the country as a whole at that time. But that's the difference between what happened in the and plus, there were other factors. Many of the loyalists who fought for the crown during the Revolutionary War fled. Most, I want to say, according to, there was a census in 1790, about 98% of the people were all Protestant who believed in the Protestant way of serving God and high ethical standards when it comes to work, when it comes to family, when it comes to everything. You didn't work on Sunday, and they enforced it. You go to church on Sunday, and so you didn't have diversity was not a thing in those days. You were either a Congregationalist or you were going to be an Anglican, and then there were some others that weren't that far different. Many of the religions were Calvinist.
Well, you mentioned the Civil War, and it's sad. What's sad is that the best part of our episode is at the end, because you and I are going back and forth. But the Civil War caused the expansion of the federal government because people, particularly the South, preferred slavery over the principle of freedom. And that's the thing, and that's right back where we are in this conversation is people are looking at the wrong thing and not looking at the principle. What is the principle behind why these arguments are made? The principle is taxation without representation is wrong. We have to be represented. It's not about guns, it's about self-defense. Your right to defend yourself and your family, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all these other things. What these politicians are doing. Why are they doing it? Is it about their ideology? Is it about their party politics? Typically, yes. Why are we in favor of certain things? Are we in favor of it because it fits with our ideology and our T-shirts or whatever? Here it is. Liberty. Liberty that should be the primary principle. It shouldn't be what's your party. Who's your favorite? Are you a Trump fan? Are you going to do everything for Trump, or is it going to be everything is anti-Trump? It's don't make it like that. It's bad enough that it's blue and red. Don't make it everything is about one person. And that's where we gravitate. We gravitate to ideologies or these cult of personalities. It's a dangerous game that we're all playing. And we have to stick to our principles and then do something about people and kick people out of office whenever they go against what they've promised, like the French did, like the Russians did, even like what we've done, in numerous times. So we principles. I think this is what this conversation more or less boils down to is all these things are happening in this country that are counter to the Constitution because politicians primarily have lost, people want their politicians, their representatives, their senators, their presidents to represent them based on the principles set forth in the Constitution, principles set forth in our primary documents, and they're not doing it. And we have our hands tied because they're in power. And like you've been saying, the best thing to do is to not comply. You and I, we did our best to not comply on a lot of things. The vaccine, the masks, speeding, not wearing the seatbelts, different stuff like that. But
speeding?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, I drive the speed limit.
I was going to say, you and I got fast cars, so yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right, man. Well, I think this has been a fun conversation. It has gone longer than I thought it would, even though we've not covered a number of things, but that's what happens when you compile your your issues that you've got with the government.
Well, that we'll just use we'll use the rest of this the next time another guest cancels on us. I'm sure it's bound to happen. So
we're living in a society. Can you believe it? We went this whole episode, and I don't think we made one Seinfeld reference except for that one. All right, dude. Well, it was great talking to you. We're going to have a really good conversation. I'm going to be talking about the Russia-Ukraine war with the guy who's been over in Moscow for 25 years as a reporter. Like, his book, Overreach, fantastic. I can't recommend it enough, but hopefully he doesn't cancel. Last time I checked, he was out in Italy, so who knows where he is right now. But anyways,
the guy that we're supposed to have today, I went through my library and I found all his books that he wrote, and I got them sitting over there.
How many do you have?
I had several books that I was going to blow. What's that saying about blowing wind or smoke up his ass?
Yeah. Well, I emailed him back, haven't heard back, and I said, we're hoping to have you on next season for a different topic. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah, you let him know. I spent hours trying to dig up all his books, so.
All right, man. Well, feel free to jump on the email as well, because you owe Alan Gaff an email response. And if you want to follow up with another email, go ahead and let that guy know. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the show. We've gone on, we've gone on for quite some time. We apologize. See you later.